One.
Hi all, this is Dr. J and Professor Spike
Hello, everybody.
coming to you not live, but on recording. We decided to try to make it a little more professional. In case we mess up, we could always delete.
Right.
Can't do that live. Are we going to delete anything you have to say today, Professor Spike?
I'm gonna try to keep my mouth shut while talking.
Well, as you know, Professor Spike is an expert on retirement planning. We did one video so far, which is very elementary, very introductory. Today, we're going to do a follow-up to that on compound interest, the power of compounding.
The power of compounding.
The power of compounding, yes. Is it powerful to compound?
It can be. Well, these days it's not as powerful, as we'll learn that, it's depending on the interest rate. And
right. Well, we can do, you have an Excel spreadsheet that allows us to do what ifs for any interest rate you put in, right?
Oh yeah. So that'll help things out. I just wanted to lay down a little bit of groundwork, only because this particular one is supposed to be for people just getting started in their career.
Right. So if somebody, or let's say somebody a little younger than me, let's say around 40.
Yeah, younger than me too then. I mean, you and I are already stuck with the decisions we made. And the whole idea behind this is to try to have people who have a little bit more time make some smarter decisions than
I made some.
Maybe not you, but at least that I did.
I made some really good decisions. And that was to maximize my IRA as much as I could from the age of 26 on.
That was very smart.
Yeah.
I started a little bit later, and again, the later you start, the more you see it at the end. And so a lot of people say, well, I have so many things that I need to do now that I don't have enough money to think about 20 or 30 years in the future. And the whole idea here is that there are two things that being young, but two things in terms of finance that being young gives you an advantage. One is that even if you end up having a couple of bad years, there's plenty of time to overcome that. The other one is that because the time you need the money is so far away, you do have a lot of this time for compounding. So in terms of being earlier in the process, taking advantage of all these opportunities, especially taxes and the tax implications, is really a good thing to do. Yeah. So when we talk about financial planning in general, Dr. J, there really is more than just investing. There's budgeting, deciding how much you could actually spend on your future versus what you need to spend now just to live. There's insurance. Now, a lot of people, especially young people, don't think about insurance, but that's because they don't think about the catastrophes that could occur. And so any reasonable planning should really include some at least idea about what could happen if you lose a job or if you get sick, or something else interrupts your income stream. So part of planning entails that too. And since we're talking about this whole general how to get started on this subject.
Well, to me, if I can interrupt one thing, there are two insurances that I always made sure I had a maximum amount that I could afford all through the years. And that was disability insurance and life insurance.
Disability insurance, is underrated.
Very important.
Extremely important. A lot of times, especially even if you get your disability through the state or through your company, a lot of times that only gives you maybe about 60% of what is your base pay. So if you make money on commissions or if you make money on the side, you'll recoup nowhere near your regular income that you're used to from these more available programs like state programs or just standard programs. So it really is worth thinking about putting a little money away just to get that number up besides 60% of your base. which, like I said, 50%.
I mean, we could do a whole show just on insurance, whether it
Yeah,
be
no, in
disability,
fact, we should do shows on all of this, budgeting
whether it be disability or life insurance,
and health.
whole life versus term life, all of that.
Yeah, we should definitely do that. Like I said, budgeting, tax planning, and later on we can start thinking about estate planning. Now, for
Yeah.
now, we're just doing mostly investments, or we're going to focus on investments, which is okay. So let's actually talk about this idea of compounding, and I'm going to do that with an example that I have, if I could find it.
This is for you, Jiggly.
This is for you, Jiggly. I actually have. All right, actually, we'll look at this one for now. I'm looking for. Oh, here it is. Okay. This is a spreadsheet I have. This is actually a calculator. We'll get back to this calculator in a minute. But the basic idea here is if you can rely on a certain interest rate and think about planning in the future, you get this kind of picture that goes on. Think about it this way, that you put a certain amount of money into, let's say in this case, a bank account where there's some reliable interest rate, and then you add deposits, say on a yearly or a monthly basis, which is the basic to planning for the future. You put some money into the bank and you plan on adding based on your budget. You plan on adding and adding and adding. And in this case here, we'll think about inflation as being in today's dollars, so that you're going to increase your deposits as you get richer to at least match inflation. And you can always change these numbers. And then you can see that the curve goes up. And the reason the curve goes up is because not only are you accumulating interest and the interest on the interest, but as you put in money into the account, that feeds more of this process of depositing and putting interest into interest. And so in this particular case, it might look a little modest. 12,000 a year, which is something the IRS says a lot of people should be doing in terms of their retirement planning. Let's say 4% interest and an initial deposit of $5,000. After just 20 years, we're to about $250,000, $300,000. So we get an idea. Then this curve here depends on a lot of things. Depends on how much we could actually put in, and it also depends on our interest rate.
Suppose you take that out to 30 years.
I'll do that in another picture. So, for instance, you can see that when I changed it to 6%, it got a lot more curvy, and we were able to actually make our way to about 450,000. So interest rate is very, very important. If you can get a good interest rate, that would be great. Now, in terms of investing, one of the problems we have in investing is that if you want a higher interest rate, you have to be willing to take more risk, because the deal is that you very rarely can just notch up your interest just because you want to. People say, well, yeah, if you want to try to make more money, then you have to take a little bit more of a gamble, which means that more of a downside to get overall more of that upside. And I have this other picture that I'm going to show you in a minute. I'm going to stop sharing. I want to just show you this other picture to show you where risk comes into play on this. And this is a picture that I show people. In this particular case, using simulation about what could go wrong. If you're using a bond, then you're guaranteed to go along the path that we talked about. But if you're going to go into stocks and take a little risk, you can see that over time, the best case scenarios and the worst case scenarios tend to get wider and wider, and this will be exacerbated the more risk you have to take. And so here, this is a case after 25 years. The difference between the best case and the worst case is pretty high, and so we have to make sure that we take into consideration risk when we decide to make an investment decision. So you can't do that. You can't just say, all right, I want to make as much money as possible. Typically speaking, there's about two different approaches that people take. One is that they do something called goal-based planning. And in goal-based planning, you decide what you think you're going to need, say, on the day you retire, or what you think you're going to need in the year that your first kid goes to college. And so then you try to make your planning around that goal, and you try to find out what it is you're willing to do to get there. The other ones are called risk-based planning or return-based planning, where you say, all right, I'm willing to take a certain amount of risk. Let me try to make as much as I can given that level of risk. And so that's another approach that you can take. The other one would be, all right, I want a certain return and I'm willing to take any kind of risk to get there. That's not as wise. So typically speaking, we like to do something called goal-based planning. So in that particular case, I'm just going to show this other this calculator here, just to give people a feel for how they can get that to work in terms of what they need to do. So in this particular case, this is the one we just talked about. You put in 5,000, put in about $1,000 a month towards your future at 4%, and after 20 years, um, you might get $250,000. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, thinking that some people have the number, but it just goes to show you how important it is to put money into your future, because you're right. If you even if though $1,000 a month sounds like a lot, it's not really going to get you where you need to be, and so that's a reality that we have to become, used to. Now we're talking about early stages. The whole idea is if earlier on now, I have a long way out. We have this idea that says, all right, I'll put in less money or I'll put in whatever I could afford, and I'll take more risk. Why? Because I'm young. I could take more risk, and then as I get older, and I start putting more and more money in, and I start making more, I could put more money into my future, and maybe ease off the throttle on the risk, so I don't throw my money away, especially as I get closer and closer to when I need that. We call that a glide path. So young people um, should think about being a little bit more aggressive and trying to get higher returns, even though the risk might be there. And then as they get older and closer to when they need the money, um, they could um, they could ease off on the return, take a little bit more take a little bit more predictable returns, like the ones offered in bonds as opposed to in stocks. So anyway, here's you said you wanted to do a couple of different what ifs, Dr. J.
Yeah, let's do a what if that I've been foolish until the age of 40. I have a family of 4, and now I got to get serious about thinking about retirement. I'm also making a lot more than I did when I was 20 and 30. So I figured it's plenty of time to catch up. I'm making 125,000 a year. My wife is making 75,000 a year. So we have a comfortable $200,000 a year of income. And when we retire, we expect that we won't need that much, but we probably will need half that much. So our goal is when we both retire, it's let's say 66. She's 39, I'm 40. So we both plan on retiring, let's say 26 years from now. And we expect that we're going to need $100,000 a year plus besides what we get from Social Security.
Right.
So and right now we only need about the same to get by, 100,000 a year. So after taxes, we're free to save on our 200,000. So we could save a sizable amount. How would you expect us? What would you advise us in terms of a diversification between bonds and stocks in order to achieve the goal of $100,000, being able to spend $100,000 a year of our nest egg for, let's say, a period of 20 years in retirement? So we want to be able to spend $100,000 a year for 20 years and not run out of money. And I'm 40 now, and I know inflation may foil my figures a little bit. So you want to throw in something for inflation, go ahead. So I'm giving you a really tough problem.
Yeah, but it's a tough problem, but it's very, very typical, which I like. I like that example because a lot of people who might be listening might be in a very, very similar situation.
Yeah, it's a tough problem because you have to project 20. I'm asking you to project
Yeah.
26 years from now, when we both retire. And I'm asking you to tell me what I could, how much I need to save
That's
between the two of us
sure.
a year, figuring our income will go up with inflation. Let's say 4% a year, it'll increase. So we can save 4% a year more each year than the initial year.
Yeah.
And how much do we need to save, and how should we diversify? How much, at least not in detail, just equities
Yeah.
versus.
No. So in terms of what regular people do, Dr. J, is that when as the story gets more and more complicated and it's more and more this is my story as opposed to a typical story, then pulling a solution out of a can doesn't work. And so
Right,
who are decent, who are pretty well off, and do have some assets that they're worried about, and do have some goals that they like to achieve, should eventually talk to a professional financial planner who has tools and also can deal with a lot of those little extra exceptions.
right.
When you're young, it's just a question of trying to find a basic idea of how much in general will get you where you need to be. So this calculator here is a very, very simple calculator for people who don't have a whole lot of details, but want to just get a rough estimate
Okay, let's
of how
use
much
this
they want to lay
calculator.
out. But let me finish off with your story though.
Yeah,
One of the interesting things about your story is that you talk about having a certain amount of income for when you retire. Let's say that you plan on retiring at 65.
66,
And you just said that
66.
you want to get 20 years of income at about 100,000, which would be about $2 million.
Right,
Now, assuming that you're still doing a little bit of investing with your money, $2 million will take you about, will take you about 23 years with interest. But even that's a little shy because we have, this whole idea that life expectancy is going up. But even as it is now, people really should plan to live into their 90s because if you look at the statistics, yes, a lot of people do die in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, but a lot of people also live that long. And so, in terms of the number, then you might have a number down here that should be maybe a little bit higher than 2 million. Let's say 2.5 million, just for if you're well off enough, then that would be your goal. Now, in terms of interest, if we just do everything in current value dollars, so that you sort of say you ignore inflation, then this number here would be after inflation, would be your overall rate that you need. So 4% here would really mean 6% that you'd have to make on an investment because of the erosion from inflation. So you would
okay,
add that to this number here. And there's also another number from taxes, but we'll leave that one aside for now because if you're
okay,
putting your money in an IRA, it'll be tax deferred anyway, right? So
right,
so now this number here would have to be somewhat reasonable. So let's suppose that it is likely that overall you can aim for something that makes 7% a year. That's not impossible. It's actually, even these days, it's possible, but you do have to expect that you're going to take a lot of risk and that this number that comes up here might be a little bit more optimistic than you'd like. But let's just do that anyway. So let's say you're already in your 40s, so you actually have a little bit more of a nest egg. So let's say you have 250,000. Sorry, you have 250,000 that you already have in the account. So you sort of
okay,
you're working your way towards that number, and you see that helps a little bit. And now you have 25 years. This is just the monthly payments, and you can see that if you put away about $1,000 a week or $12,000, excuse me, $1,000 a month or about 12,000 a year, you're not really at that goal. So then you have to think about what it would take to go here. So let's say if we just doubled this, let's just see what would happen. Two thousand
okay,
dollars a month. You see this here. This is it. It doesn't make that much of a difference. All right. So you really do have to be aggressive in how much you put away. And so we could find this number.
Well, also maybe you have to be more aggressive in your mix and look
Right. So
for.
right. So 7% might be maybe you'd say, all right, I'm willing to take a little bit of a risk. I'm willing to, because we're talking about it being so far off, I'm willing to try to make a little bit more money, go into some alternative investments. Maybe I could pop this over to 6% after inflation. So
Well, if you're looking at 26 years,
and then you see that
what,
now that one change, those two changes did get us to 2.5. So
yeah,
what ends up happening then is that we usually have two or three throttles that we play with. One is, are you willing to change your risk profile to meet your goal? The second one is, can you scare up more money towards your future? A lot of times people say no, but if they really looked at it, they could, especially if there's a tax benefit for doing so. And as you get to be our age, you get to realize that the likelihood of making it, into 65 and 75 is quite profound. And so it doesn't seem like you're throwing this money away that you'll never see it. We will see it because we are going to hit 65, very highly likely. And then the third thing is actually to change this number. In other words, to say, all right, I'd like to live on 100,000 a year, but maybe I could survive on 80,000 a year. Then this number goes down. So we usually play with this number here, what we're willing to use as a goal, this number here, what we're willing to pay towards our future, and this number here about what we're willing to invest. And so this basic calculator right here at least gives us a feel for the numbers. Now, we know that there's a lot more detail. There's taxes. There's stocks are doing great this time. Now it's value stocks. Then it's going to be growth stocks. Right now, Asia's doing one thing. Maybe later on we can get into global equities and get a better.
Well, what I was thinking of as a hypothetical scenario is.
Yeah, so that's when you get deeper into the weeds, you need a better tool than this. But when you
Well,
just
I don't want. I want to
perfectly adequate.
simplify it so that this tool might be usable. Let's
Yeah,
just say we go into two investments. We go into the Vanderbilt stock S&P fund, which historically has paid about 11% over a year over a long period of time. And let's figure a more modest 8% return over 26 years.
Right. I want to actually show that in action, Dr. J.
And the symbol is VOO, or you could use SPY. It doesn't really matter. They're virtually the same. And the other one would be the Vanderbilt short-term corporate bond fund, which has also historically done very, very well. So let's say a 4% return on that. So you have, let's say you do a split, half and half. So on half, you're going to get 4%, half, you're going to get 8%, typically. Of course, you got those lines where you could do much worse and lines where you do much better. But typically, 4 and 8 would be the split. What would you get investing, let's say, 10% of your income, or is that over the 26 years?
Right.
And putting 10,000 in each fund, let's say.
Okay, so what's going on there, Dr. J, is that one of the throttles we were talking about in terms of changing that percentage would be that the fraction. So let's suppose then that we have a choice of only these two things, which is a basic idea. Most people think about a split of 3 things: cash, bonds, and stocks. And if you think most simply, it's those 3 major categories. These days, the only reason to have cash would be for the safety of it, and there's no reason really to keep that much cash. So really, really the basic idea is between stocks and bonds. And so when we talk about people earlier on in their careers or earlier on, they might overall need to get 7%, but they will put early on, they'll go 10% or aim for 10%. And they'll go really deep into stocks and less deep into bonds because they're willing to take that risk early. They're not risking as much money as
Right,
they
and that's
go along.
probably the smart thing to do. But let's say I'm stupid and I go 50-50 all
Well,
the way
if you
through
go
and never
50/50,
change it.
then you're going to be more conservative.
More
And so you'll have
conservative.
that smaller number in the calculator. And we saw that, 4% or 6%, you really, there's sensitivity there, but the real sensitivity is in the amount of money you could scare up. But certainly, yeah, the more you can invest, the better. And like I said, this idea of the glide path, where you want to have an overall of say 7%, but what you'll do is you'll take 10% early in your life, and you'll move down to 5% later in your life. And how do
Right,
you do that? By as you get older, you buy more and more bonds and fewer stocks.
right.
And that's pretty much the way you affect that strategy. And so as you go along, if you find that you're not making enough, you delay switching over to bonds, and you stay with stocks a little bit longer. A lot of people don't want to do that, but they might have no other choice if they really want to meet their goal. Remember, the idea here is that um,
All right, but I want an
it all
answer.
depends on this
I want
number.
you to punch into your magic calculator that
My
I'm
magic
going to.
calculator is in here because I have a tool for what you're talking about, but it's not handy.
Oh, I see. All right, for homework, I want you to punch into your magic
For our
calculator
next show,
for our
I'll
next
get
show.
deeper in the woods in terms of the specific
Just,
investment. Everybody
just
saw I
us.
put something up on the screen, which was this basic idea about how you could adjust your level of risk and your level of return based on your choices between different asset classes.
Here's the
And that
problem.
might be a good lesson
Here's the
for the next.
problem I'm giving you. Assume my wife and I are extremely successful going forward. We both work till we're 66. We have 26 years to go. We have a start. You want to put in whatever start you want. 250,000, fine. We've accumulated 250,000, and we want to save at the rate of 10% of our salary into our IRA fund, and we're getting a 4% match from each of our
Ah,
employees.
that's another reason why young people should get involved.
Yes. So in other words, I want you to say
And that brings this number up.
the first year it's 20,000 plus 4% of that being matched, whatever that is,
Mhm.
going into those two funds, figuring 8% and 4% on average growth for the next 26 years.
Mhm.
And we keep on doing that. Each year we're going up in salary. So the next year we're going to have 10% more salary, 220,000 to play with. 10% of that is 22,000 and so on. Can you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's essentially as you track your money over time. You just have to change this model into a slight bit more detail, which most financial planners have. I have those tools as well. So what happens is when we talk about individual people, we will actually get those values. How much money do you have? How much money can you afford? How much risk are you willing to take? And you can get a little bit deeper into the weeds. And so that's why you end up hiring somebody who has those tools and has the magic ability to manipulate the numbers around so that you can
I
actually
hired
write that off.
nobody. I just played it by instinct, and it worked out for me. But
Uh-huh. So you got
and
lucky.
I,
Well, you're
and I
also a
wrote
math guy, so you sort of know how these numbers work.
sort of. I mean, I didn't use any compound interest formulas. I didn't plan anything, but it worked out nicely.
Right. You have to know that when you put your money, if you don't spend your money and you save it in a good place, it'll be there for you later. That's why you don't
Yeah,
stick it in the mattress
yeah.
because
But I think
you don't know what the rats are going to do.
looking back to when I was 40, I think I should have taken a more methodical approach. I might have done even better.
Most likely. I mean, the most often the solution is put more away for the future because of the tax benefits. especially if your company is matching.
Yeah.
We tell that to 20-year-olds, we tell that to 40-year-olds, and even the government tells it to 50-year-olds because this 12,000 a year or 15,000 a year that the IRS assumes you need to save. They say after 50, they're going to actually add another 10,000 to say, look, you really need to save, because it's a big problem in the United States about people not saving enough for their retirement, and Social Security is not going to cover the shortfall. Social Security.
Right. But there is a limit, right? That there's also a max that they allow you to put in.
Right, but they up the max for people who turn 50. Once you turn 50, they pretty much
Right.
double the max, because they
Right.
really want people, even if they haven't thought about it in their 40s, to start thinking about it in their 50s.
Now there's one way to get around the max, and that's to do a Roth IRA. I believe that you pay the tax up front, but then you can put as much money as you like that'll go tax-free into the Roth.
Right. The benefit there is that you don't pay taxes on the gains on a year-to-year basis.
Right.
You allow all your gains to accumulate. We didn't really talk about tax impacts, but you allow all your returns to accumulate, and then you just pay at the end.
And also, there's no limit. You could put.
That's right. You don't pay the tax at the end. You're right. So you pay a tax up front on the money, and then anything you get in return.
And you don't have to put in at most 15%. You can put in 50% of your income.
Right, but that's only, you're only allowed to do that if you don't have a plan at work, and if you have a certain limit on your income. But it's definitely
so. In other words, it's more for self-employed people.
Yeah, it's a little bit more of a it's if you have a good pension plan, you're encouraged to use that. These Roth IRAs are thought of as once you're on your own, or once you're retired, maybe using that as a place to hold your money in between. Or if you don't have a good plan, that's the way to.
You can convert though at almost any time.
Yes, you can convert. They've been a lot more willing to do that because the government would rather you pay your taxes early so they know where their money's coming from.
Right.
As opposed to allowing you to wait. There's also something else that most people when they're retired are aware of. It's called the required minimum distribution. So that if you put your money in an IRA so that you're not paying taxes on it, by the time you turn 70 and a half, they're going to force you to take some of that money out so that you have to stop paying taxes on it.
Whereas with a Roth, you could not touch it. If you don't need the money, you never have to touch it.
You've already paid the taxes in the Roth.
And you could leave a tax-free nest egg to your children.
Leave it there forever. It's not really tax-free. It's just that your gains are tax-free.
Right, but what I'm saying is you can leave X amount of that whole sum of money to your heirs, and they don't have to pay taxes on that money.
They don't, unless they're rich like you and have to pay an estate tax.
All right, I guess there's always a catch.
There always is. This was a nice conversation. I'd really like to have some more of these as we go along.
Well, yes, maybe we'll do one of them live so that Jiggly can ask you about his portfolio.
That would be fun.
All right, so this has been.
I'll make sure I have more of my tools available at that point.
This has been Dr. J and Professor Spike talking retirement planning. And as you can see, we just touched the tip of the iceberg.
Yes. It's
a very complicated area. And we're going to do many more videos and some live shows so that you can ask Professor Spike, how am I doing?
Yes, indeed. We need to know. We need feedback.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much, Professor Spike. Okay. And I gave you homework for our next show.
That's right. Bye all.
Bye all.